The courthouse smelled faintly of polished wood and old paper, the kind of scent that lingers after decades of whispered arguments and careful verdicts. Outside, autumn leaves swirled across the wide stone steps as the morning sun filtered through gray clouds. Inside, a buzz of anticipation rippled through the grand hallway like static before a storm. Today's trial was supposed to be routine, a high-profile burglary case that had dragged on for months, but everyone present sensed that something about this day felt different. They just didn't know why. Reporters arrived early, their cameras dangling like impatient eyes. They spoke in hurried bursts, trading theories while checking their phones for updates. The wooden benches of Courtroom 3 filled quickly with townspeople, some drawn by curiosity, others by quiet dread. For weeks, the case had dominated the local news. A string of late-night burglaries that left families frightened and investigators frustrated. Expensive electronics had vanished, safes had been cracked open, and in every case the culprit left behind almost nothing, no fingerprints, no clear pattern, just a faint trail of confusion. Today's hearing was meant to tie up loose ends, to finally bring the accused man to justice. Near the back of the courtroom, a young woman named Claire shifted nervously on a hard bench. Her 3-year-old daughter, Emma, sat on her lap swinging her small legs back and forth, her bright sneakers brushing against her mother's skirt. Claire had hesitated to attend the hearing. She wasn't a witness, nor was she directly involved in the case. But her friend Lisa worked as a paralegal and had urged her to come. "It's history in the making," Lisa had said the night before. "They've got the guy this time. You should see it." Claire wasn't sure why she agreed. Maybe she wanted a break from the monotony of their quiet apartment. Maybe she hoped the spectacle of justice would distract her from worries she rarely voiced aloud. Emma, for her part, seemed fascinated by everything. Her wide hazel eyes darted from the carved columns to the high windows where sunlight pooled like liquid gold. She pointed a tiny finger at the judge's bench and whispered questions in her mother's ear. "Why is it so tall? Who sits there? Can I sit there?" Claire smiled weakly, answering in hushed tones, but her own gaze kept drifting toward the heavy double doors at the front of the room. Any moment now, the defendant would enter. The murmur of voices quieted when the bailiff called for order. The judge, a silver-haired woman with a reputation for sharp wit and even sharper rulings, strode in, her black robe flowing behind her like a shadow. Everyone rose, the scrape of wooden benches echoing through the chamber. Emma giggled at the sudden movement, but Claire tightened her hold, her heartbeat quickening for reasons she couldn't name. As the judge took her seat and the lawyers prepared their notes, the defendant was led in by 2 officers. He was a broad-shouldered man in a gray suit, his expression unreadable. Cameras clicked, pens scratched across notepads, and a ripple of tension tightened the air. Prosecutor Michael Grant began his opening remarks with practiced precision. He outlined the evidence. Security footage showing a masked figure, shoe prints matching the defendant's size, a suspicious bank deposit made days after the burglaries. The jury listened with rapt attention, their faces a mix of curiosity and concern. Grant's voice was steady, but Claire sensed an undercurrent of frustration. The case, though strong on paper, still lacked the single undeniable piece of proof that would crush any doubt. Everyone knew it. Everyone felt it. Emma, oblivious to the stakes, wriggled on her mother's lap. She whispered that she wanted a better view. Claire hesitated, then allowed her daughter to stand on the bench. From this new vantage point, Emma could see nearly everything: the stern jurors, the polished witness stand, the silent man accused of invading strangers' homes. Her small brow furrowed as she studied the defendant with the serious concentration only a child could muster. As testimony continued, Claire's attention wandered. She thought about the night months earlier when she'd awakened to a faint creak in the hallway of her apartment. The memory flickered like a half-remembered dream. The squeak of a floorboard, the cold rush of fear. She had convinced herself it was nothing a neighbor, a settling building, but sometimes, late at night, she still replayed the sound. She squeezed Emma's hand without realizing it. The little girl looked up and gave a reassuring smile, as if sensing her mother's unease. The morning session unfolded in careful layers. Witnesses described the burglaries in quiet voices. A neighbor testified about seeing a shadow slip across a driveway at midnight. A forensic specialist explained how a single strand of fiber connected the suspect to one of the crime scenes. Still, there was no dramatic reveal, no shocking confession, just the slow grind of legal procedure. Reporters scribbled notes, but exchanged glances of mild disappointment. Perhaps today would end like so many other hearings, with arguments and technicalities, but no final clarity. Then the bailiff announced a brief recess, and the mood shifted. People stretched their legs, whispered to one another, and checked their phones. Lawyers gathered in small clusters, their heads bent in hurried discussion. The judge stepped into her chambers for a private consultation. The hum of conversation filled the room again, a low murmur like bees in a hive. Claire leaned down to retrieve Emma's dropped toy when a sudden movement caught her eye. The side door opened, and Officer Daniels entered with a large German shepherd trotting obediently at his side. The sight drew instant attention. Conversations hushed as the officer and his canine partner made their way toward the witness stand. Rex, the department's prized canine, moved with a quiet authority, his black and tan coat gleaming under the overhead lights. Claire felt Emma straighten beside her, the little girl's eyes widening in fascination. "Look, Mommy," Emma whispered, her voice bright with excitement. "A doggy." Claire nodded, though her own curiosity sharpened. Why bring the canine into the courtroom now? Daniels explained to the judge that Rex was present to illustrate how scent tracking had helped locate a crucial piece of evidence. The demonstration was meant to reinforce the prosecution's argument, a visual reminder of the meticulous police work behind the case. Jurors leaned forward, intrigued, as Daniels described how Rex followed invisible trails of scent across neighborhoods, leading investigators closer to the suspect. Emma was transfixed. She leaned over the railing, her small fingers gripping the polished wood. Her nose wrinkled as if she were smelling something only she could detect. Claire chuckled softly, assuming her daughter was merely enchanted by the impressive animal. But Emma's expression wasn't the wide-eyed delight of a child admiring a dog. It was something deeper, something more cautious. Her gaze followed Rex's every movement with a concentration that seemed far beyond her years. The officer finished his explanation, and the judge nodded her approval. The demonstration was brief, almost routine, but it left an odd charge in the air. Rex stood calmly beside his handler, tail wagging once before settling again. Most people turned back to their conversations as the recess continued. But Emma remained utterly still, her hazel eyes fixed on the dog with an intensity that made her mother uneasy. Claire bent down to whisper, "Sweetheart, it's just a police dog. Isn't he handsome?" Emma didn't answer. Instead, she inhaled sharply, as if catching a faint scent. Her tiny shoulders stiffened. Then she looked up at her mother, her face pale with the seriousness no 3-year-old should wear. Claire's breath caught. Before she could speak, Emma turned toward the front of the courtroom, where Rex stood proudly beside Officer Daniels, and opened her mouth as if to announce something to the world. The room, still buzzing with casual chatter, had no idea that the next words from a toddler's lips would change the course of the trial and several lives forever. The courtroom doors closed with a heavy, deliberate thud, cutting off the low hallway chatter. Inside, a hush spread like a slow-moving tide as Officer Daniels adjusted the leash of his German shepherd. Rex, the dog, padded forward, his paws clicking softly against the polished oak floor. He moved with quiet confidence, a living emblem of discipline and purpose. Every movement, each calculated step, each flick of his ears, carried an authority that needed no words. Emma's small fingers tightened around the edge of the wooden railing as she leaned forward for a closer look. Her mother felt the shift immediately. The child's tiny body, usually restless and full of impatient energy, had gone perfectly still. Claire followed her daughter's gaze and found herself studying the animal with a similar fascination. Rex was magnificent, sleek, alert, his amber eyes scanning the room like a seasoned detective. But there was something else, something Claire couldn't quite name. Maybe it was the faint smell of leather and pine that accompanied him, a scent that carried echoes of long walks in damp forests or late-night streets. The judge, seated high above the courtroom, adjusted her glasses and nodded to the bailiff. "Proceed," she said, her voice crisp but curious. The morning had been filled with dry legal arguments and methodical testimonies. Now, at last, there was something to stir the room, a living, breathing piece of evidence. Officer Daniels stepped to the center of the floor, his posture straight and professional. "Your Honor, members of the jury," he began, his deep voice carrying across the chamber. "This is K-9 Officer Rex. He's been with the department for 5 years and has assisted in numerous investigations, including the case before you today." Rex stood at attention beside him, tail still, ears perked. "With your permission," Daniels continued, "I'll explain how his scent-tracking abilities led us to crucial evidence." The judge gave a brief nod. A few jurors leaned forward in their seats. Reporters poised their pens. Daniels began to describe the process in careful, precise language. He explained how a trained police dog can distinguish a single human scent from thousands of competing smells, following an invisible trail through alleyways, fields, and city streets. He recounted the night Rex picked up the faint trace of the suspect's presence near a wooded park and guided officers to a hidden stash of stolen electronics. As he spoke, he gestured toward a series of photographs projected onto a screen: dimly lit streets, a muddy creek bed, a torn glove half buried in leaves. The audience watched with rapt attention. Even those who had followed the case for months seemed newly captivated by the silent partnership between man and dog. The jurors exchanged glances of quiet admiration. Children in the gallery, brought by parents curious to witness justice in action, whispered excitedly. But among the spectators, one small face remained unsmiling. Emma's hazel eyes tracked Rex's every movement, but her mouth was pressed into a tight, thoughtful line. Claire noticed and brushed a gentle hand across her daughter's back. "Isn't he amazing?" she whispered. Emma didn't respond. Her eyes narrowed slightly, as if she were trying to solve a puzzle too complicated for words. Daniels continued, unaware of the quiet drama unfolding in the back row. "During our investigation," he said, "Rex successfully followed a scent trail from the scene of the burglary to an abandoned warehouse. That trail led us to evidence connecting the defendant to the stolen property." He paused, letting the significance settle over the room. "Without Rex, we might not have found that link." A low murmur of appreciation swept through the spectators. Cameras flashed as reporters jotted notes. But Emma's small shoulders stiffened. She tilted her head slightly, inhaling as though catching a faint smell carried on an unseen breeze. Claire felt her daughter's heartbeat quicken through the thin fabric of her dress. "Sweetheart," she whispered, concerned, "are you okay?" Emma finally spoke, her voice barely audible. "He smells," she said simply. Claire blinked. "What do you mean?" Emma's nose wrinkled. "Like the man." The words were soft but unmistakable. Claire felt a jolt of unease ripple through her chest. "What man, honey?" she asked, her voice tight. Emma kept her eyes on Rex, her brow furrowing in concentration. "The man who came to our house," she whispered. Claire's breath caught. The memory she had worked so hard to bury, the creak of floorboards, the cold rush of fear flashed vividly in her mind. She had never told Emma much about that night. She had hoped the child would forget. But children, she knew, remembered things adults wished away. A chill ran down her spine. At the front of the room, Officer Daniels knelt beside Rex and gestured toward a table of carefully sealed evidence bags. "This glove," he said, holding one up, "was located after Rex alerted us to a concealed hiding spot. The DNA inside provided a match to the defendant." He returned the glove to the table and gave Rex a quiet command. The dog sat obediently, eyes bright, as though proud of his contribution. The judge thanked Daniels and indicated the recess would continue for a few more minutes. People began to relax again, the sharp tension of testimony giving way to casual conversation. But in the back row, Claire could not shake the creeping dread curling through her stomach. Emma's words echoed in her mind. "The man who came to our house." It couldn't be more than a coincidence, she told herself. Maybe Emma simply recognized the faint smell of leather from Rex's harness, or the clean musk of his fur. Children invented connections all the time. Yet Emma's expression remained deadly serious. She didn't fidget or look around like the other children. Her eyes stayed fixed on the German shepherd, unwavering. The little girl tilted her head again, her small nostrils flaring slightly as though confirming a private suspicion. Then she looked up at her mother and whispered, "It's the same smell." "I know it." Claire swallowed hard. Her first instinct was to reassure her daughter, to explain it away. But something in Emma's steady gaze held her back. Children, she thought, sometimes sense things adults refuse to see. The possibility lodged in her mind like a thorn. Unaware of the silent storm building in the gallery, Daniels clipped Rex's leash and prepared to exit. The dog rose smoothly to his feet, muscles rippling beneath his glossy coat. As he turned, his amber eyes swept briefly across the room. For an instant, Claire felt the dog's gaze meet Emma's, a fleeting moment of connection that sent another chill down her spine. Rex tilted his head slightly, as if acknowledging the child's intense stare, before following Daniels toward the door. A few feet from the exit, Rex paused. His ears twitched. He turned his head back toward the gallery, nose lifting to sample the air. Daniels gave a gentle tug on the leash, but the dog hesitated for a heartbeat longer before obeying. The small delay went unnoticed by most of the spectators, but Claire saw it. So did Emma. The child's eyes widened, her little fingers gripping the railing with sudden urgency. Before Claire could react, Emma straightened, her tiny frame taut with purpose. She took a deep breath, as if summoning courage far beyond her years. Then, in a voice clear and bright enough to slice through the low hum of conversation, she called out two simple words. The courtroom froze. Heads turned. Conversations died mid-sentence. Officer Daniels stopped mid-step. Rex halted beside him, ears pricking forward. Emma's finger pointed directly at the German shepherd. Her cheeks flushed pink, but her voice rang out again, louder this time, echoing against the marble walls. "Bad man?" The words landed like a thunderclap. Reporters jerked upright. Jurors exchanged startled glances. The judge, halfway to rising from her chair, froze mid-motion. The sudden silence was so complete that the faint rustle of papers sounded like a shout. Claire's heart pounded as the weight of the child's declaration settled over the room. Every eye turned toward the little girl in the back row, toward the child who, with two innocent words, had just shifted the entire atmosphere of the trial. The sound of a child's voice rarely holds the power to stop an entire room. But Emma's words, two small syllables that seemed to echo off every pane of polished wood, froze the courtroom, as if time itself had paused. "Bad man." The declaration rang sharp and pure, slicing through the ambient hum of shuffling papers and low conversation. Reporters lowered their pens. Jurors, mid-stretch, jerked upright as though tugged by invisible strings. Even the judge, who moments earlier had leaned toward her clerk with a routine question, turned her head in astonishment. For a breathless heartbeat, no one moved. Claire felt the world narrow to a pinpoint of sound and light. Her heart slammed against her ribs, each beat a painful thud. Emma stood on the bench now, her small hand extended like a compass needle pointing directly at Rex, the German shepherd who stood frozen beside Officer Daniels. Her cheeks flushed pink, but her hazel eyes burned with unwavering certainty. "Bad man," she said again, louder this time. The words reverberated across the marble walls, carrying a force that belied their simplicity. The gallery erupted in a chorus of startled murmurs. Reporters exchanged wide-eyed glances, their fingers itching to scribble, but too stunned to move. The defense attorney, halfway through gathering his papers, stopped cold, his mouth opening in a silent question. Officer Daniels tightened his grip on Rex's leash. The dog stood motionless, ears pricked forward, amber eyes fixed on the little girl. A muscle twitched in his powerful neck, the only sign that he registered the sudden tension. The judge rapped her gavel sharply, the crack echoing like a gunshot. "Order in the court," she commanded, though her voice carried a tremor of curiosity beneath its practiced authority. She peered over her glasses, scanning the gallery until her gaze settled on the small figure standing defiantly in the back row. "Who said that?" the judge asked, though the answer was obvious. All eyes turned toward Emma. Claire felt heat flood her face. She wrapped an arm protectively around her daughter's waist, trying to guide her back to the bench. "Emma, sweetheart, sit down," she whispered urgently. "You can't yell in court." But Emma resisted, planting her tiny sneakers firmly against the wooden seat. "Bad man," she repeated, her voice ringing with a conviction that made Claire's breath catch. This wasn't the playful mischief of a toddler testing boundaries. This was something else, something heavy and real. Officer Daniels exchanged a cautious glance with the judge. "Your Honor," he began, his baritone steady but edged with surprise. "May I approach?" The judge hesitated, tapping a manicured nail against the bench. Finally, she gave a short nod. "Proceed, but carefully." Daniels guided Rex toward the gallery, the dog's nails clicking softly against the floor. The spectators parted like water around a stone, their whispers rising like a tide of restless curiosity. When they reached the back row, Daniels crouched to meet Emma's gaze, his expression gentle but probing. "Hi there," he said, his voice warm but professional. "My name is Officer Daniels, and this is Rex. Can you tell me why you said that?" Emma tilted her head, studying the officer for a long moment before answering. Her small hand remained outstretched toward Rex, fingers trembling slightly but unwavering. "He smells," she said simply. Daniels blinked. "He smells?" Emma nodded. "Like the man who came to our house." A ripple of shock coursed through the spectators. Claire felt her knees weaken. The memory she had buried, the creak of the hallway floorboards that night, the faint scent of leather and smoke flared vividly in her mind. "What man, honey?" Daniels asked, his voice soft but urgent. "The man who took things," Emma said, her words slow and deliberate, as if choosing them carefully. "The man Mommy said went away." Claire's throat tightened. She had never told Emma much about that night, had avoided details in hopes the child would forget. Yet here Emma was, recalling it with chilling clarity. Daniels leaned slightly closer. "You mean someone came into your house before?" Claire swallowed hard and nodded faintly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes, months ago. I didn't report it. I thought it was. She stopped, aware of the dozens of eyes fixed on her. I thought it was nothing. The judge, who had been listening intently, leaned forward. Mrs. Claire Hughes, Claire supplied, her cheeks burning. Mrs. Hughes, the judge said firmly, did you experience a burglary in your home? Yes, Claire admitted, her voice trembling. I didn't think it was connected. The courtroom erupted again in a storm of whispers. Jurors exchanged wide-eyed looks, reporters scribbled furiously, and the defense attorney's face paled several shades. Officer Daniels straightened, his gaze sharp with sudden understanding. He turned toward the prosecution table where Michael Grant, the district attorney, was already rising to his feet. Your Honor, Grant said, his voice ringing with controlled urgency, this may be significant. I request a brief recess to speak with Mrs. Hughes and her daughter privately. The judge rapped her gavel once more. Granted. Court will recess for 20 minutes. Bailiff, escort Mrs. Hughes, her child, and Officer Daniels to the consultation room. The bailiff approached, gesturing for Claire and Emma to follow. Claire gathered her daughter in her arms, her pulse racing as they made their way past the rows of staring faces. Emma rested her head calmly against her mother's shoulder, as if unaware of the commotion she had caused. Behind them, Rex watched intently, his amber eyes following their exit until the door closed. The consultation room smelled faintly of coffee and stale carpet. Claire sat stiffly in a metal chair, Emma perched on her lap like a small, determined sentinel. Officer Daniels knelt beside them while District Attorney Grant paced nearby, his brow furrowed in thought. Mrs. Hughes, Grant began, please tell us everything about the night someone entered your home. Claire recounted the details she had tried so hard to forget. The faint squeak of the hallway floorboard, the shadowy figure slipping through the darkness, the cool night air rushing in through the cracked window. She described the faint scent leather mixed with smoke that lingered long after the intruder had fled. Emma listened silently, her small fingers tracing invisible patterns on her mother's sleeve. When Claire finished, Grant turned to the child. Emma, he said gently, how do you know Rex smells like that man? Emma met his gaze without flinching. Because it's the same smell. I remember it. He smelled like Rex smells now. Grant exchanged a look with Daniels, who straightened abruptly. Your Honor, he said, turning toward the door as if addressing an invisible courtroom. If the child recognizes the scent, it could mean the suspect handled Rex or was in close proximity to him before the burglary. We need to re-examine all scent transfers in this case. Grant nodded, already pulling out his phone to call the forensic team. Claire tightened her embrace around Emma, a mix of awe and fear tightening her chest. Her daughter's simple declaration, a connection no adult had made, had just cracked the case wide open. Back in the courtroom, the atmosphere buzzed with restless anticipation. Reporters speculated in urgent whispers. Jurors exchanged theories, and the defendant sat rigid, eyes darting toward the consultation door with barely concealed unease. What had the child said? What new evidence was coming? When the judge finally re-entered and called the court back to order, every person in the room leaned forward, eager for the next revelation. What began as an ordinary recess had transformed into a turning point, a moment when the smallest voice in the room had shifted the entire balance of justice. And no one, not even the seasoned detectives, could predict just how far Emma's 2 words would reach. The consultation room felt too small for the magnitude of what had just unfolded. A single flickering fluorescent bulb buzzed faintly overhead, its cold light casting sharp shadows on the beige walls. Claire sat rigid in a metal chair, Emma balanced carefully on her lap. Across the narrow table, District Attorney Michael Grant leaned forward, his pen poised over a yellow legal pad, though he'd barely written a word. Officer Daniels stood near the door, one hand resting lightly on Rex's leash. A German shepherd sat obediently at his side, but his amber eyes tracked every movement with an alertness that seemed almost human. "Mrs. Hughes," Grant began, his voice measured but urgent, "we need to understand exactly what your daughter meant in the courtroom. Please start from the beginning. Tell us everything about the night of the incident." Claire exhaled shakily, her fingers gripping Emma's small hands. "It was late," she said, her voice unsteady. "Maybe past midnight. I woke up because I thought I heard a creak in the hallway outside my bedroom. At first, I told myself it was just the building settling, but then I smelled something smoke and leather, maybe? Like someone's jacket after a bonfire." Grant exchanged a quick glance with Daniels, who nodded almost imperceptibly. "I got out of bed," Claire continued, "but by the time I reached the living room, the window was open, and whoever it was gone. I didn't call the police. She hesitated, embarrassed. "I convinced myself it wasn't a big deal. Nothing obvious was missing. I thought maybe I'd imagined it." Grant's pen finally scratched across the page. "You didn't notice anything disturbed? No drawers opened, no valuables missing." "Not that I could see," Claire admitted. "But Emma, she woke up too. She was so little, but she told me later that she saw a shadow in the hallway. I told her it was just a dream." Emma spoke for the first time, her small voice clear and steady. "It wasn't a dream." Everyone turned toward her. Her hazel eyes, so bright moments ago in the courtroom, now carried a quiet seriousness. "He was real," she said, glancing briefly at Rex, "and he smelled like him." Grant leaned forward. "Emma," he said gently, "you're very brave for telling us this. Can you explain what you mean when you say Rex smells like the man?" Emma tilted her head, considering her words carefully, as if she were older than her 3 years. "It's the same smell. The man in our house smelled like Rex smells now. Like the outside. And smoke. And something I don't know." Daniels crouched beside the child, his professional demeanor softening. "Emma," he asked softly, "do you think Rex smells like that because maybe the man touched him? Or maybe because Rex went where the man went?" Emma blinked, then nodded with the solemn certainty of a child who knows what she knows. "Yes, he smelled him." A shiver ran down Claire's spine. Children could be fanciful, yes, but Emma wasn't guessing. There was no hesitation in her words, no nervous giggle to soften the edges. She spoke with a quiet conviction that filled the room like a low hum of electricity. Grant sat back, tapping the end of his pen against the pad. "Officer Daniels," he said, his tone sharpening, "could there be a scent transfer between the suspect and the K9? Daniels straightened. "It's possible," he admitted. "If the suspect came into contact with Rex, handled an object Rex later tracked, or even interacted with Rex during training, it could explain the familiarity. Dogs carry scent particles in their fur for quite a while." Grant nodded slowly, the wheels turning behind his eyes. "And if the child recognizes that scent, it means," Daniels finished, "that the man who burglarized their home is likely the same man Rex tracked in this case." The implications settled like a thundercloud. Claire tightened her hold on Emma, feeling the small rise and fall of her daughter's chest against her own. A wave of guilt washed over her. If only she had reported the break-in months ago, maybe this suspect would have been caught sooner. Maybe other families wouldn't have been terrorized. Grant snapped his notebook shut and rose from his chair. "We need to cross-check the suspect's movements and any interactions with the K9 unit," he said, urgency threading through his voice. "This could open an entirely new line of evidence." Daniels nodded, already reaching for his phone. "I'll contact the forensic team to re-examine the scent trail and review all of Rex's prior deployments." Claire swallowed hard. "What does this mean for us?" "It means," Grant said carefully, "that your daughter may have just provided the key to linking the defendant to more than one crime. You both may need to give formal statements. And it means we'll need to ensure your safety." "Safety?" Claire echoed, her stomach tightening. If this suspect realizes he's connected to another burglary, one he wasn't being tried for today, he may attempt to intimidate witnesses, Grant explained. "We'll assign an officer to escort you home and keep watch." Claire nodded, though fear prickled at her skin. She glanced down at Emma, who rested her head calmly against her mother's chest, seemingly unfazed by the gravity of the conversation. The child's small hand patted her mother's arm as if offering reassurance. "It's okay, Mommy," Emma whispered. "The bad man won't come back." The quiet certainty in her daughter's voice was both comforting and unnerving. When the courtroom reconvened, the atmosphere crackled with a new electric tension. The jurors whispered among themselves, their eyes darting toward the doors where Claire, Emma, Officer Daniels, and Rex re-entered. Reporters sat on the edge of their seats, pens poised like weapons, ready to capture the next twist. The judge, her expression unreadable, struck her gavel once. "Court is back in session. Before we proceed, the prosecution has requested a special evidentiary motion. Mr. Grant?" Grant rose, his presence commanding immediate attention. "Your Honor, during the recess, new information came to light that directly impacts the case before us. With the court's permission, we would like to enter this information into the record and request a temporary delay to allow for forensic review." The defense attorney leapt to his feet. "Objection. This is highly irregular. We can't allow unverified statements from a child to derail." "Counselor," the judge interrupted sharply, "you will allow the prosecution to explain before you object further." Grant stepped closer to the bench. "Your Honor, the child in question may have witnessed an unreported burglary that connects directly to the defendant. Furthermore, her spontaneous recognition of the K-9 unit sent suggests a transfer between the suspect and the police, dog indicating the same individual is responsible for both incidents. We have reason to believe the defendant may be involved in additional crimes." A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom. The defendant shifted uneasily in his seat, his once calm demeanor cracking under the weight of the revelation. His eyes flicked toward the gallery, lingering briefly on the small child sitting quietly on her mother's lap. A muscle twitched in his jaw. The judge regarded him coldly, then turned back to Grant. "This is indeed serious. I will grant a brief continuance to allow for forensic analysis. The jury is instructed not to discuss these developments outside this courtroom." The defense attorney protested again, but his voice lacked conviction. The tide of the trial had shifted. Everyone could feel it. The power of Emma's simple observation now loomed larger than any legal argument. As the bailiff escorted the jury out for an extended recess, Claire felt the weight of countless eyes on her and Emma. Strangers stared with a mix of awe and disbelief, as if witnessing a miracle unfold in real time. She held Emma close, whispering a quiet thank you against her daughter's soft hair. Emma looked up, her eyes bright but calm. "Did I help, Mommy?" Claire's throat tightened. "You helped more than you'll ever know." Officer Daniels approached with Rex at his side. The dog lowered his head toward Emma, who reached out a tiny hand to gently pat his nose. Rex's amber eyes softened, a silent acknowledgement passing between the child and the dog. For a moment, the weight of the courtroom, the tension of the trial, and the threat of the unknown all faded, leaving only a strange, undeniable truth. A 3-year-old's pure instinct had accomplished what months of investigation had struggled to achieve. And though the trial was far from over, everyone present understood that the smallest witness in the room had just changed everything. The courthouse corridors hummed with a strange energy as evening settled outside. Reporters lingered near the exits, trading whispers and snapping photos of every passing figure, while deputies ushered staff and jurors out for the night. Inside a secure conference room on the second floor, a different kind of tension simmered, quiet but sharp as a knife's edge. District Attorney Michael Grant paced the narrow space, a phone pressed to his ear. He spoke in low, clipped sentences, occasionally pausing to listen before jotting notes on a legal pad. Across the room, Claire sat with Emma nestled in her lap, her arms wrapped protectively around the small child. Officer Daniels stood near the door with Rex, who rested at his feet, ears twitching with every faint hallway sound. The walls felt too close, as if the weight of the day's revelations pressed inward with invisible force. Claire glanced at her daughter, whose head rested sleepily against her chest. Emma's breathing was slow and even, but her tiny fingers still gripped her mother's sleeve in a quiet display of determination. Grant ended his call and turned to face the group, his expression grave. Forensics confirmed a partial DNA match between the defendant and evidence collected at your apartment, he said without preamble. Specifically, fibers and trace skin cells found on the window frame you described. The analysis isn't complete, but it's already strong enough to suggest a direct connection. Claire tightened her hold on Emma, her heart pounding. So, it was him? The man on trial? Grant nodded slowly. All signs point to yes. Your daughter's recognition of Rex's scent wasn't just a child's imagination. It was the first clue to link the suspect to an entirely separate crime. Officer Daniels shifted, his eyes narrowing. That means this guy didn't just commit the burglaries he's charged with. He may have been operating longer, maybe even testing homes before escalating. And he was comfortable enough to break in while they were home. A shiver ran down Claire's spine. The memory of that night returned in sharp flashes, the faint smell of smoke, the creak of floorboards, the cold breeze from the open window. She'd convinced herself it was nothing, a trick of nerves. Now the truth felt like a lead weight in her chest. What happens next? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Grant leaned on the table, his tone firm but calm. Tonight, our priority is your safety. We've arranged an officer to escort you to a secure location. We'll also need an official statement from you, Claire, and a recorded interview with Emma if she's willing. Tomorrow, we'll present this new evidence to the judge and push to expand the charges. Daniels added, I'll personally oversee the escort. Rex will be with us as well. The suspect is in custody, but we're not taking chances. Emma stirred, blinking sleepily. Mommy? She murmured. Are we going home? Claire kissed her daughter's forehead. Not tonight, sweetheart. We're going somewhere safe. Just for now. Emma looked up at Rex, who lifted his head in silent acknowledgement. Is the dog coming? Yes, Daniels assured her with a small smile. Rex is coming too. He's your partner now, isn't he? Emma's sleepy grin flickered for a moment. He smells the bad man, she said softly, before nestling back against her mother. Grant exhaled and straightened. That child, he said quietly to Daniels, just gave us what months of surveillance and analysis couldn't. Daniels nodded. Kids notice things adults overlook. Scent memory is powerful, especially for someone so young. She didn't need to explain. She just knew. 2 hours later, the team moved with quiet efficiency. A pair of unmarked police vehicles waited in the courthouse basement garage, their engines idling. Claire carried Emma, who had fallen back asleep, while Daniels walked beside them with Rex. The air smelled faintly of oil and concrete, a stark contrast to the courtroom's polished wood and stale coffee. As they exited, Claire couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Her eyes darted to every shadow, every parked car. Daniels noticed and offered a reassuring nod. He's in a cell across town, he said. He can't get to you. But Claire couldn't help imagining the suspect's cold eyes as the prosecution revealed the new evidence earlier that day. He had looked directly at her, no, at Emma, his gaze sharp and calculating. Even now, the memory made her skin crawl. The ride to the safe house passed in tense silence, broken only by the soft hum of the engine and Rex's occasional sigh. Danielle sat in the back with Claire and Emma, the dog resting at their feet like a living shield. Outside, city lights streaked across the dark windows, each flash of neon and traffic light a reminder that the world beyond their small bubble of safety carried dangers both seen and unseen. At the safe house, a modest, nondescript home in a quiet suburban neighborhood, 2 officers greeted them and conducted a quick security sweep. Once inside, Claire finally allowed herself to exhale. The living room smelled faintly of detergent and new carpet. A single lamp cast a warm glow across the couch where she laid Emma, covering her with a soft blanket. Daniel stayed near the front door, speaking in hushed tones to the other officers. Claire watched him for a moment, grateful for his steady presence. Rex, ever vigilant, settled beside Emma, his head resting on his paws, but his eyes alert to every sound. "Thank you," Claire said quietly when Daniels approached. "For all of this?" He gave a small shrug. "Just doing my job. But I'll admit your daughter surprised all of us today. She's got instincts you can't teach." Claire managed a tired smile. "She's always been aware, even as a baby. I just never imagined it would matter like this." Daniels crouched to Rex's level, scratching behind the dog's ears. "Sometimes the smallest details solve the biggest cases," he said. "Kids pick up on things we overlook. Scents, sounds, little habits. They don't second-guess themselves the way adults do." Claire looked down at Emma, asleep and peaceful despite the storm she had set in motion. "I almost didn't come to court today," she admitted. "I thought it was just another trial. If she hadn't been there." Daniels met her eyes. "You did come. And because of that, we may catch a man who's been hurting families for months. Don't underestimate that." Back at the courthouse, Grant stayed late, piecing together the puzzle Emma had unwittingly cracked open. Phone records, security footage, and police reports now aligned in chilling patterns. The defendant's movements overlapped suspiciously with a string of unsolved burglaries across 3 neighboring counties. Each incident shared eerie similarities: late-night entries, faint traces of smoke, and a distinct absence of stolen valuables, as though the intruder had been testing boundaries rather than seeking profit. Grant highlighted a line of text in one report, his pulse quickening. Weeks before the burglary at Claire's apartment, a neighbor in the same building had reported a man loitering near the stairwell. The description, tall, dark jacket, leather gloves, matched the defendant perfectly. The report had been filed and forgotten, buried beneath more urgent cases. Now, with Emma's testimony and the forensic match, it became a vital piece of a much larger puzzle. As the clock crept past midnight, Grant closed his laptop and leaned back, the weight of the case settling on his shoulders. The trial, once a straightforward burglary prosecution, had become a doorway into a deeper investigation, one triggered not by technology or detective work, but by the unfiltered honesty of a 3-year-old child. Meanwhile, in the safe house, Claire awoke to the sound of Rex shifting beside the couch. The dog's ears pricked, his body alert. Claire froze, listening. A car engine rumbled faintly outside, before fading into the distance. Daniels appeared silently from the hallway, his hand resting near his holstered weapon. "Just a passerby," he whispered after a moment. "But Rex doesn't miss a thing." Claire exhaled, her nerves frayed. She glanced down at Emma, still sleeping peacefully. For the first time since the break-in months ago, she felt a fragile sense of safety, not because the danger was gone, but because someone finally understood the truth. Emma stirred, her small hand reaching toward Rex in her sleep. The dog leaned closer, his warm breath steady against her fingers. In that quiet moment, Claire understood something profound. The path to justice wasn't always paved by experts or technology. Sometimes it began with the smallest witness, a child's unshakable memory, and two simple words that refused to be ignored. The forensics lab at the County Justice Center hummed with a low mechanical rhythm. Machines whirred softly behind glass walls, their blinking lights casting faint reflections on the polished floors. Detective Carla Ruiz stood over a workstation cluttered with sealed evidence bags, her sharp eyes scanning a freshly printed DNA report. The results had arrived faster than expected, thanks to an emergency request from District Attorney Michael Grant. What she read tightened the knot already forming in her stomach. It was a match. Partial, but strong enough to link the defendant, Christopher Lane, to the unsolved break-in at Claire Hughes's apartment. The same man on trial for a series of burglaries had left behind microscopic traces of himself months earlier, right where little Emma had said he would. Ruiz exhaled slowly, allowing herself a moment of satisfaction before picking up the phone. Across town, in the safe house where Claire and Emma rested under guard, Officer Daniels answered the call. He listened in silence as Ruiz delivered the news. When she finished, he allowed himself the faintest smile and murmured, "Good work," before hanging up. Claire, who had been sitting on the couch with Emma curled beside her, immediately sensed the change in his expression. "What is it?" she asked, her voice tight. Daniels met her gaze. "The lab confirmed it. The man on trial, Christopher Lane, left DNA evidence at your apartment. Your daughter's memory wasn't just accurate. It's the missing piece we've been searching for." Claire's breath caught. Relief flooded her chest, mingled with a fresh wave of fear. So it really was him. "Yes," Danielle said. "And this match gives the prosecution what they need to expand the charges. Lane isn't just a burglar. He's been stalking homes, testing boundaries. Your case may connect to a larger pattern." Emma stirred, rubbing her eyes. "Is the bad man gone?" she asked sleepily. Daniels crouched to her level, his voice steady but warm. "He's locked up, sweetheart. And thanks to you, he's not getting out anytime soon." Emma blinked, considering his words, then nodded with quiet certainty. Good. Later that morning, the courthouse buzzed with a new urgency. Prosecutors and detectives crowded into a cramped conference room where Grant spread the fresh forensic reports across the table. Red circles and handwritten notes marked key sections of each page. Beside him, Detective Ruiz outlined the timeline of Lane's movements. "The DNA match from the Hughes apartment is our strongest link so far," Ruiz said, tapping the report. "But we've also reviewed scent trail logs from the K9 unit. Rex tracked Lane from two of the burglary scenes weeks apart. The chemical markers on the fibers recovered from the Hughes window match residue from Lane's vehicle. We're looking at a serial offender with a very specific signature." Grant leaned forward, his jaw tightening. "This isn't just about burglary anymore. Lane was entering occupied homes without stealing much of value. That suggests he was testing access, gauging reactions, escalating behavior." Detective Ruiz nodded grimly. "If Emma hadn't recognized Rex's scent, we might never have connected the Hughes break-in. It's possible Lane was preparing for something worse." A heavy silence followed. The weight of what could have happened, what might still happen if Lane had remained free, settled over the room. Grant finally broke the silence. "We'll move to amend the charges immediately. I want a motion on the judge's desk before the afternoon recess. And we'll need Claire and Emma ready for testimony. Their statements will establish the timeline and the sensory connection." Meanwhile, the defense scrambled. Lane's attorney, a sharp-featured man named Preston Clark, paced the holding room, where his client sat handcuffed to a steel table. "They're introducing new evidence," Clark said, his voice low and urgent. "DNA from another scene. You told me there was nothing that could connect you to those apartments." Lane's eyes, cold and calculating, narrowed. "I never set foot in that woman's place." "Then explain the DNA," Clark snapped. "Explain how a child could recognize a scent trail tied to you." Lane smirked, a flash of arrogance breaking through his otherwise controlled demeanor. "Kids imagine things, and DNA can be planted." Clark rubbed his temples, frustration mounting. "The jury won't see it that way. If the prosecution ties you to more than one crime, you're looking at decades." Lane leaned back, the faintest trace of a sneer curling his lip. "Then make sure it doesn't get that far." The cryptic remark sent a chill through Clark, though he couldn't quite say why. There was something unnerving about the calm confidence with which Lane faced the tightening noose of evidence. Back at the safe house, Claire tried to keep Emma occupied with coloring books and a small puzzle provided by one of the officers. Despite the quiet domestic scene, Claire's thoughts churned like a storm. Every time she glanced at the locked front door, she pictured Lane's eyes from the courtroom, dark, sharp, and disturbingly steady. He knew who they were now. And though he was behind bars, the fear of retaliation lingered. Daniels noticed her tension and crouched beside the couch. "He can't reach you," he said firmly. "We're taking every precaution." Claire forced a nod, though the knot in her stomach remained. "I keep thinking, if Emma hadn't said anything, he'd still be out there." Daniels offered a faint smile. "Sometimes justice starts in unexpected places." A 3-year-old, a police dog, a single scent, those small details cracked the case wide open. That's nothing short of remarkable. Claire looked at Emma, who was carefully placing puzzle pieces with quiet concentration. "She's always noticed things," Claire said softly. "Little things I miss." Daniels's gaze softened. "That's a gift. One that might have saved more lives than we'll ever know." By late afternoon, the courtroom once again filled with a buzz of anticipation. Reporters packed the gallery, cameras flashing as Grant strode confidently to the prosecution table. Claire sat near the front with Emma and Daniels, her heart hammering as she prepared to hear the evidence unveiled. Judge Matthews entered, her gavel striking once for silence. "We are here to consider the prosecution's motion to introduce new evidence," she announced. "Mr. Grant, you may proceed." Grant stepped forward, his voice carrying clear authority. "Your Honor, the state has obtained forensic results linking the defendant, Christopher Lane, to an unreported burglary at the residence of Claire Hughes and her daughter Emma. This evidence includes DNA, recovered from the scene and corroborating scent trail data from the K9 unit." Gasps rippled through the gallery. Grant continued, "We contend that this evidence establishes a pattern of behavior beyond the charges originally filed. We request permission to amend the indictment to include this additional burglary and any related offenses." The defense attorney rose, his face tight. "Objection, Your Honor. This so-called evidence is circumstantial and hinges on the unreliable recollection of a toddler, hardly a credible witness." Before the judge could respond, a small voice rang out from the front row. "It's not pretend." Emma's words echoed through the courtroom. Every head turned. She pointed a tiny finger toward the defendant and said clearly, "That's the bad man. I remember." The silence that followed was electric. Judge Matthews raised a calming hand. "Order in the court. The child's statement will be noted. Mr. Clark, your objection is overruled. The motion to amend the indictment is granted." The gavel struck again, sealing the decision. Lane's jaw tightened, his eyes flashing with a barely contained fury. For the first time since the trial began, a mask of composure slipped, revealing something dark and dangerous beneath. As the court adjourned, Grant allowed himself a brief glance toward Claire and Emma. The child sat calmly on her mother's lap, unaware of the tidal shift her words had set in motion. A simple recognition of scent, an instinctive declaration of truth. These had accomplished what weeks of investigation could not. Outside, reporters swarmed the steps, eager to capture every new detail. Inside, detectives worked quickly to secure warrants for Lane's vehicle and storage unit, convinced they would uncover further proof of his crimes. For Claire, the moment brought both relief and unease. Justice was moving forward, but the man who had invaded her home now faced a lifetime behind bars, and he knew exactly who had helped put him there. She held Emma close, whispering a quiet promise into her daughter's hair. "It's almost over," she said softly. Emma looked up, her eyes clear and steady. "Bad man gone soon," she said. And in that small, confident voice lay the power of truth, a force that no defense, no lie, and no darkness could overcome. Morning sunlight filtered through the courthouse windows, casting sharp rectangles of light across the polished marble floors. The air inside felt electric thick with anticipation and the faint hum of whispered conversations. News of the new DNA evidence had spread overnight, and the trial that once attracted only a handful of local reporters was now a magnet for statewide media. Television crews crowded the front steps, camera flashes popping like firecrackers as attorneys, deputies, and curious onlookers streamed inside. In the prosecution's conference room, District Attorney Michael Grant reviewed his opening notes with quiet intensity. The previous day's breakthrough had turned the case from a routine burglary trial into a potential serial offender prosecution. The stakes were no longer just conviction. They were about exposing the full scope of Christopher Lane's crimes before he could manipulate the narrative. Grant adjusted his tie and closed the file with deliberate precision. "This is it," he thought. "We can end this today." Detective Carla Ruiz entered briskly, a folder in hand. "We've finished searching Lane's vehicle and storage unit," she said without preamble. "We found leather gloves with trace fibers matching the Hughes apartment window frame and a small box of souvenirs, house keys, photos, and jewelry. Items stolen from at least 4 different burglary scenes." Grant's eyes hardened. Souvenirs. Classic escalation behavior. He wasn't just stealing for money. He was keeping trophies. Ruiz nodded grimly. "This man isn't just a thief. He's a predator." Grant exhaled slowly. The evidence was damning, but he knew the defense would fight viciously to discredit it, especially the testimony of a 3-year-old child. Inside the courtroom, Claire Hughes sat in the front row with Emma perched quietly on her lap. Officer Daniels occupied the seat beside them, his canine partner Rex stretched calmly at his feet. The dog's steady presence comforted Claire more than she expected. The gallery behind them buzzed with barely contained curiosity, reporters whispering into tiny recorders and texting updates to their editors. Emma swung her small legs and looked up at her mother. "Is it over today?" she asked softly. "Maybe," Claire replied, brushing a strand of hair from her daughter's forehead. "The nice people are going to tell the judge everything we know." Emma nodded, her hazel eyes bright but calm. "The bad man will go away." Claire kissed the top of her head, marveling at her daughter's quiet courage. "That's what we're here to make sure of." At precisely 9 o'clock, the bailiff called the courtroom to order. Judge Matthews entered, her black robes flowing as she took her seat behind the high mahogany bench. "We are here to continue the trial of Christopher Lane," she announced, her voice carrying easily over the murmurs. "The prosecution may proceed." Grant rose with measured confidence. "Your Honor, the state wishes to present newly uncovered physical evidence connecting the defendant to multiple burglaries across 3 counties. We will demonstrate that these crimes share a pattern of escalating behavior, culminating in the unreported break-in at the home of witness Claire Hughes. The defense attorney, Preston Clark, stood abruptly. "Objection, Your Honor. The prosecution is attempting to paint my client as a serial criminal based on circumstantial evidence and the unreliable testimony of a child." Judge Matthews regarded him coolly. "Your objection is noted and overruled. The prosecution may continue." Grant turned to the jury, his voice steady but forceful. "Ladies and gentlemen, yesterday you heard how a 3-year-old child recognized the unique scent carried by a trained K-9 officer. That recognition led investigators to re-examine a previously unreported crime scene. Today, you will see the forensic proof DNA, fibers, and stolen property that corroborates the child's statement. This is not coincidence. This is a pattern of criminal behavior. The jurors leaned forward, their expressions a mix of shock and fascination. Grant gestured toward Detective Ruiz, who stepped to the stand and began methodically presenting the evidence. Photographs of the gloves, the stolen items, the DNA match. Each piece stacked higher the mountain of proof against Lane. As the exhibits were shown on the overhead screen, Claire kept her gaze fixed on the table before her, unwilling to look at the objects that represented nights of fear for so many families. Emma, however, watched with wide eyes, her small brow furrowing in concentration. When a photo of the leather gloves appeared, she tugged at her mother's sleeve. "Mommy," she whispered. "Those smell like the bad man, too." Claire squeezed her daughter's hand, her heart aching with pride and sorrow all at once. When it came time for cross-examination, Clark rose slowly, his posture crisp, but his eyes betraying strain. "Detective Ruiz," he began, "isn't it true that DNA evidence can be transferred indirectly? That fibers can be moved from one location to another without direct contact?" "While transfer is theoretically possible," Ruiz replied evenly, "the likelihood of these specific matches occurring by accident across multiple scenes is virtually zero." Clark pressed on. "And the so-called eyewitness is a 3-year-old child. Are you asking this jury to convict a man based on the nose of a toddler?" Ruiz met his gaze without flinching. The child's observation was the starting point. The conviction will rest on science. Clark's jaw tightened. His argument was crumbling, and he knew it. Grant's final move came as the courtroom clock edged toward noon. "Your Honor," he said, "the state requests to recall Claire Hughes for brief testimony." Claire's pulse quickened as she carried Emma to the witness stand. The little girl sat quietly on her mother's lap, swinging her feet as the clerk administered the oath in simplified language Emma could understand. Grant crouched to Emma's eye level. "Emma," he said gently, "do you remember the night someone came into your home?" Emma nodded. "Can you tell the jury what you remember?" A child's voice was small but steady. "I woke up and smelled smoke and outside. I saw a shadow. And today, the dog smelled like that shadow." Grant pointed discreetly toward Lane, seated at the defense table. "Emma, do you see the person whose smell you remember?" Without hesitation, Emma raised a small finger and pointed directly at Lane. "That's the bad man," she said. The courtroom erupted in gasps. Lane shifted in his seat, his composure finally cracking. His eyes narrowed, lips curling in a thin, dangerous line. For a fleeting moment, something dark flickered across his face, an unmistakable flash of recognition, almost triumph, as if he relished the attention. Judge Matthews banged her gavel sharply. "Order! Order in the court!" Claire held Emma close, shielding her from the sudden flurry of noise. Daniels stepped forward instinctively, his hand resting near his holstered weapon, as Rex rose to his feet, muscles tense, eyes locked on Lane. When calm was restored, Grant stood once more. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he said, his voice ringing with conviction, "you have heard from forensic experts. You have seen the stolen property. And now you have witnessed the unfiltered truth from the only eyewitness to one of these crimes, a child too young to fabricate such a connection. The evidence is overwhelming. The defendant is guilty of every charge and more. The jury sat in stunned silence. Some members scribbled notes, others simply stared at Lane with a mix of revulsion and disbelief. Clark made a final attempt at damage control, but his closing remarks felt hollow against the weight of the evidence and the raw honesty of a child's testimony. The prosecution would have you convict a man based on the scent of a dog and the words of a press schooler, he argued, his voice rising. Is that justice, or is it desperation? But the jury's eyes told the story. They had seen enough. As the judge dismissed the jury to deliberate, Lane leaned toward Clark, his voice a low, venomous hiss. This isn't over, he muttered. Not for them. Daniels, standing nearby, caught the words and stiffened. Rex growled softly, a low, warning rumble that sent a ripple of unease through the defense table. The bailiff stepped closer, his hand tightening on Lane's shoulder. That's enough, he said firmly. Lane smirked, but said nothing more. Outside the courtroom, the hallway pulsed with reporters desperate for updates. Inside, Claire hugged Emma tightly, her heart both pounding and strangely light. The trial was nearly over, but the most important part was already done. Her daughter's courage had spoken louder than any lawyer's argument. Officer Daniels crouched beside Emma, offering a small smile. You did something incredible today, he said. You helped make sure a dangerous man can't hurt anyone else. Emma tilted her head thoughtfully. Rex helped too. Daniels chuckled. That's true. You and Rex make a pretty good team. Emma grinned and reached down to pat the dog's head. Rex leaned into her tiny hand, his amber eyes softening. For the first time in months, Claire felt the faint glimmer of safety, a fragile but undeniable sense that justice was within reach. Whatever the jury decided, the truth had already been revealed by the smallest, most unexpected witness in the room. The heavy oak doors of Courtroom 3 creaked open as the jury filed back in, their faces solemn, their steps deliberate. The air inside felt almost liquid with tension, as though the very walls were holding their breath. Every spectator leaned forward, hearts pounding in unison. After hours of deliberation, the 12 men and women who held Christopher Lane's fate were ready to speak. Claire Hughes tightened her arms around Emma, who sat sleepily in her lap, unaware of the magnitude of what was about to unfold. The child had fallen into a light doze during the wait, her small head resting against her mother's shoulder. Across the aisle, reporters gripped their pens and microphones, eager for the verdict that would end a trial that had captured the state's attention. Judge Matthews entered briskly, her black robe swishing as she took her seat. The bailiff's deep voice rang out. All rise. Chairs scraped against the polished floor as the courtroom stood. Claire rose slowly, careful not to wake Emma. She could feel the pounding of her own heart against her daughter's back. The forewoman of the jury, a middle-aged woman with steely eyes and a calm demeanor, held a folded paper in her hands. She avoided looking at the defendant as she passed the verdict to the bailiff, who handed it to Judge Matthews. The judge scanned it quickly, then nodded and returned it. Will the defendant please rise? The judge said, her voice cutting through the silence. Christopher Lane stood, his posture rigid, his expression unreadable. For days he had worn the mask of a man wrongly accused, but now a faint tension played at the corners of his mouth, betraying the storm beneath. The forewoman's voice was steady but unmistakably firm. On the charge of first-degree burglary, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of possession of stolen property, guilty. On the charge of trespassing with intent, guilty. On the charge of aggravated burglary relating to the Hughes residence, guilty. The words struck the room like a series of quiet thunderclaps. A collective gasp rippled through the gallery, followed by the muffled sob of a relieved victim in the second row. Lane's jaw tightened, his fingers curling into fists at his sides, but he made no sound. Judge Matthews nodded gravely. The jury's verdict is hereby accepted. Sentencing will be scheduled at a later date. A defendant is remanded to custody without bail. Lane exhaled sharply through his nose, his eyes flashing for a brief, dangerous second. Then the deputies moved in, cuffing his wrists behind his back. The metallic snap of the handcuffs echoed like a final punctuation mark to weeks of fear and uncertainty. Claire felt her knees weaken as the verdict settled in. Relief washed over her in waves, warm and dizzying. She held Emma close, kissing the crown of her daughter's head. "It's over," she whispered. "We're safe now." Emma stirred slightly and blinked awake, her hazel eyes heavy with sleep. "Is the bad man gone?" she mumbled. Claire smiled, her voice soft but steady. "Yes, sweetheart. The bad man can't hurt anyone now." Emma nodded sleepily and rested her head back against her mother's shoulder. The simple trust in her daughter's eyes was more powerful than any gavel strike. Reporters swarmed the hallway as soon as the doors opened, their cameras flashing like a sudden summer storm. Microphones thrust forward, voices overlapping with urgent questions. "Claire, how does it feel to see justice served?" "District Attorney Grant, will there be further charges in other counties?" "Officer Daniels, what does this case mean for the K-9 unit?" Claire shielded Emma from the bright lights, grateful when Officer Daniels stepped in to create a protective barrier. Rex padded calmly beside him, his sharp eyes scanning the crowd with quiet vigilance. Grant addressed the press with measured confidence. "Today's verdict is a testament to the power of community and the courage of unexpected heroes." A 3-year-old child's innocent observation led investigators to evidence that might have remained hidden for years. Justice has been served not only for the Hughes family, but for every victim of Christopher Lane's crimes. Cameras clicked furiously, capturing the young prosecutor's words. But even as Grant spoke, most eyes were drawn to Emma, tiny, sleepy, and clutching a stuffed rabbit, as though unaware she had just helped change the course of multiple criminal investigations. Outside on the courthouse steps, the autumn air felt crisp and alive. Claire inhaled deeply, savoring the scent of fallen leaves and the faint aroma of roasted coffee from a vendor across the street. For the first time in months, she felt a sense of unshakable safety. The nightmare was over. Officer Daniels approached, Rex trotting faithfully by his side. "You both did something incredible," he said, his voice warm but serious. Most adults wouldn't have noticed what Emma noticed that day. Claire looked down at her daughter, who was now crouched beside Rex, giggling softly as the big German shepherd nuzzled her hand. "She's always been observant," Claire said with a proud smile. "But I never imagined her noticing something like this." Daniels crouched to Emma's level. "You know, Emma," he said gently, "Rex is a hero dog. But today, you were the hero." Emma's eyes widened. "I'm a hero?" "The bravest kind," Daniels replied. "You told the truth when it mattered most." Emma grinned shyly and wrapped her arms around Rex's thick neck. The dog leaned into the embrace, his amber eyes softening. For a fleeting moment, the entire courthouse plaza seemed to pause, the chaotic noise of reporters fading into a quiet snapshot of innocence and gratitude. In the days that followed, the story spread across the country. News outlets dubbed it the Little Witness case. Headlines celebrated Emma's courage and the sharp instincts of Rex. The K-9, whose familiar scent had triggered a memory that unraveled a criminal's careful deception. "Tiny nose, big justice," read one newspaper. 3-year-old Sparks' breakthrough in serial burglary case, proclaimed another. Letters poured in from strangers' parents, teachers, and even retired detectives, praising Emma's bravery and Claire's calm strength. Toy stores sent gifts for Emma. A local bakery offered free treats for life. The Hughes' quiet suburban life was suddenly filled with interviews, photographs, and heartfelt thank you cards from families who had once feared their burglaries would go unsolved. Despite the sudden attention, Claire kept their lives grounded. She limited interviews and politely declined offers for television appearances. "Emma is just a little girl," she told one reporter. "She deserves a childhood, not a spotlight." Still, the case had ripple effects that reached far beyond their home. Across the state, law enforcement agencies reopened cold burglary files, inspired by the reminder that even the smallest details, an unnoticed scent, a child's memory, could unlock hidden truths. Months later, Claire and Emma attended a quiet ceremony at the county sheriff's department. Officer Daniels presented Emma with a small medal engraved with the words "Courage, Beyond Years." Rex sat proudly at attention as the sheriff pinned the medal to Emma's dress. "This is for being brave," Daniels said, kneeling to meet Emma's eyes. "You helped us catch a very dangerous man. That makes you an honorary member of the team." Emma beamed, clutching the medal as if it were the most magical treasure in the world. "Does Rex get a medal too?" Daniels chuckled. "Rex gets a lifetime supply of treats." The room erupted in laughter, the tension of the past months replaced with joy. That night, as Claire tucked Emma into bed, the little girl traced the edge of her medal with sleepy fingers. "Mommy," she whispered, "did I really help the police?" Claire kissed her forehead, her voice soft but steady. "You helped more than you'll ever know. You told the truth when nobody else could see it. That's what heroes do." Emma smiled, her eyes drifting shut. "Rex and me, heroes." Claire watched her daughter sleep, her heart full. The trial, the fear, the sleepless nights, all of it had led to this quiet, perfect moment. Justice had been served, not by force or intimidation, but by the innocent clarity of a child who saw the world exactly as it was. The courthouse would eventually return to routine. Reporters would move on to other stories. But for those who had witnessed the trial, the memory of a 3-year-old pointing her tiny finger and uttering 2 simple words, "Bad man," would remain unforgettable. It was a reminder that truth can come from the smallest voices, and that even the faintest spark of courage can light the path to justice. And in a quiet house on a quiet street, a little girl slept soundly, a medal glinting softly on her knitstand, and a hero dog dreaming at her feet symbols of a victory born from innocence, bravery, and the unshakable bond between truth and love.